Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahalo, moni wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedlie, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so honored and so wicked happy that you'll join us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show. And please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Himalaya, Good Pods, wherever you find your podcast. Today, my amazing co-host Ann O'Leary and I speak to Brooke Jorden about her brand new book, How Does Our Food Grow? Before we invite our guests into the studio, we want to invite all of you to visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com. If you are an author, you absolutely want to click the Authors Click Here button at the top of the page to find out how you can be a guest here on the podcast and submit your book to our Certified Great Read panel. If you are a parent or an educator, please be sure to click the Parents Click Here button at the top of the page to discover our blog and also to download our Reading with Your Kids online magazine. It is a whole lot of fun, and it just gets better every single month. Join us right now from the absolutely beautiful state of Utah. Our guest is here today to celebrate her brand new book. It's called How Does Our Food Grow? Please welcome to the show, Brooke Jorden. Hey, Brooke, how are you?
Hi. Thanks, Jed. I'm great.
Super happy to have you on. Also joining us, our co-host today from California, our amazing intern, Ann O'Leary. Hey, Ann, how's it going?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing wonderfully. Ann is doing some phenomenal work putting together Cooking with Your Kids segments for the Reading with Your Kids magazine and also for the podcast. And I'm just so excited because, Brooke, I think that cooking with your kids, talking to our kids about food is really important and really helpful, but it also is, it just like reading with our kids, there's so many benefits. It really helps us grow closer with our kids.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There's so many benefits from just the connection you build to the healthy habits that you lay the foundation for life. And, you know, just, I think everyone probably has a memory of something they made with a parent, with a grandparent. Yeah. And those recipes stick with us. Those memories stick with us. Even if we're not great cooks ourselves. Yeah. So there's so many benefits to it.
Yeah. One of the things that I've said in the past, I know there are a lot of parents out there, especially parents with younger kids, they're kind of dreading, oh man, at some point I'm going to have to talk to my kids about drugs and alcohol and cigarettes, and when should I do it? And I always tell them, how old's your kid? 3 now. And they look at me and I'm like, oh, yeah, but you're not going to talk about drugs. You're going to talk to your kids about making healthy choices. And cooking with your kids is such a great way to start those conversations, talking about the choices that we're making about what we're putting into our bodies.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's all about age appropriateness, both in talking about drugs eventually, but even talking about food. There are certain things that we can teach our kids about food, about what food does in our body. And as they grow, we can give them more and more information, and that really empowers them to make those choices that will be best for them. Yeah. And will also give them a happy life, right?
I love that. And don't you love that? Giving kids the information they need to have a happy life.
Yeah, no, it's super great advice. I definitely am learning to start eating better, like learning about healthier foods as I'm, you know, a new college student living in my apartment. And so I've been trying to learn along the way, like what's the healthiest alternative to what I normally like to eat. And so it's been very helpful.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm still working on it too, and so like I'm almost 100, so you got me beat, so don't worry about it.
Thank you.
Brooke, can you tell us what How Does Our Food Grow is all about?
Yeah. So the purpose of this book, research tells us, again, if we give our kids information appropriate to their age, it informs their choices. And when we put that power in their hands, they feel better, they're empowered. So this book is all about providing age-appropriate information. So each different page talks about a different fruit, vegetable, food that's grown, tells how that food grows. So, for example, corn grows on a stalk, strawberries grow on a vine on the ground, cauliflower, broccoli is the flower of that plant. So just kind of the fun physical aspect that way. And then a few little tidbits about what those different foods do in our body. So we have a page about beans, about legumes, and we talk about how when it's paired with rice, it's protein that makes our body strong, or that berries have properties that are good for our brain. And so it's really on a kid's level, but just giving them that information about each food that they may or may not recognize that will hopefully build some interest in trying those foods. So I have 3 kids, and they are all completely different eaters. One of them is super adventurous. She will try anything. The other is more of a typical kid eater. She's not sure. She'll try a little and then usually likes it. And then my son is very, very nervous. He gets very anxious about trying new foods. He has a very limited palate at this point, and they were all raised in the same house, right? So they just kind of come with those, with that personality. And so I think this approach of just building curiosity in these different kinds of foods, showing in these beautiful illustrations lots of different children trying them, seeing them growing in gardens. The hope is that this book can really encourage that curiosity, encourage kids to take that step and try these foods and then find out what they like. It is possible they'll try these things and not love them. I've tried broccoli so many times and I'm still not a huge fan of just raw broccoli, right? A nice broccoli cheddar soup, sure. And that's totally okay for people to have food preferences, right? But this book opens, I think, the doors to questions, to where can we find these kinds of foods? How do we use them? Have we ever tried these, Mom? And I hope that it'll spark those conversations. The other aspect of this book, I partnered with Kitchen Connection, which is an organization of the United Nations that works with families with children all around the world to support healthy eating habits, as well as food production that supports our global climate. And so I think it's really important that we don't frighten our children with the reality of, climate change and put it too much on their shoulders at a young age. However, I think it's so empowering to say these kind of vegetables, for example, beans, legumes generally, require less water when we garden them, when we farm them. So that's a really great choice we could make for our planet's health. So it's good for your body's health and good for your planet's health. So the book kind of speaks on both of those levels.
Yeah. I think that's really exciting. Just in terms, just the whole issue of water. Here in the East Coast, we're not really thinking about water. Occasionally we have droughts and everything, but water is pretty much there whenever we need it and turn it on, as opposed to some of the states in the Southwest where it's a real issue right now. And there are a lot of people who are very concerned, and rightfully so, that there might not be water for them in the future. And
Absolutely.
so I think that that's a real fun, safe way to talk about an issue that's important. And one of the things that we did, we had a segment that we do here occasionally called Protecting the Planet with Your Kids. And our goal is to talk to the kids about the environment, but give them ways that they can help and make a difference with, as you said, without terrifying them, without scaring them, without thinking that, oh my goodness, if I use too much water when I brush my teeth, the world's going to end next week.
Right. Yeah. I don't think there's any reason to catastrophize, but rather, again, say there are choices we can make that do make a difference. And one of those choices is what we choose to eat.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not advocating for fully plant-based eating either, but there are ways that we can both fuel our body and prevent waste. I think that's a big part of the book as well, and something that every individual can be responsible for. So we talk about with like snap peas. We can eat the peas inside, but we can also eat the pod. And not everyone does. That's one element of waste. And some people don't even know you can use the leaves as well. So I think just bringing in, like you said, those actions that we can take, giving a course of action is so empowering, because then we don't feel powerless against something that feels, it is a huge and global problem, but what are some steps that I, as one little person, can do that make me feel like I'm doing my part? I think everyone wants to feel that, whether they're a child or a grown-up.
Brooke, one of the things that you mentioned, and I'm really curious, that you partner with Kitchen Connections, which is part of the UN. And we've talked here with lots of authors on the show and talked about the fact that writing is sometimes, well, very oftentimes, a very solitary kind of pursuit, and you're doing it by yourself in your office or in your writing space. What was it like with the idea in the back of your head that, hey, I'm not writing this by myself, and I'm writing this with the UN, with the world? I'm like, this is big stuff.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I've had sort of both of those experiences, like being in the silo versus being maybe a little more exposed. And certainly there is some weight to it, knowing I feel this is very important work, what they're doing and what I'm trying to do with them with this book. But also some comfort, knowing that I have another set of eyes, more experts looking at this, making sure that we are putting in as much information as we can, writing it the best way we can for children. And then knowing that both of our audiences can also overlap, so we have this wider reach. So I can reach my audience and Familias can reach our audience, but then Kitchen Connection has this different audience. So this message can now go to more and more families. Certainly working with the UN, there's more bureaucracy than I'm typically accustomed to, right? There's levels that have to approve different things, and that's just fascinating to see diplomacy at work, right? But so even though that can sometimes slow the process, we were able to bring in such a variety of perspectives, and they were very understanding that, like, I'm the author. Their input was just that, feedback and input and a conversation. And nothing was ever like, you have to do it this way. It was all what will best serve the book, what will create the best final product that we can then share with the children of the world. So it was ultimately very rewarding working with an organization like Kitchen Connection.
And I have to tell you, I think Brooke has a future in diplomacy because she described that process of going through all that bureaucracy as fascinating as opposed to what I probably would have described it as like frustrating and hair-pulling and making me crazy.
Yes. Well, we can be diplomatic about it. Certainly it can be frustrating and, when time frames stretch on, things like that. But we understand that is the price to pay to work with an organization like this. And we dot our I's and cross our T's and make sure that it's out for the world to see.
Well, in a moment, I am going to ask you I think you were going to share a recipe with us that I'm really excited about that we can make with our kids. But before we do, you mentioned our friends at Familius. You're the editorial director at Familius. And just coincidentally, Ann and I were having a conversation about our work being edited and how we sometimes feel about that. We have lots of authors and aspiring authors who listen to the podcast, and a lot of independent published and self-published authors. And oftentimes when I say to them, "Hey, make sure you have your book edited," I get back, "Oh yeah, my wife is an English teacher, and she checked it for typos," and that's not quite what I mean. Can you talk a little bit about the benefit and how important it is to have a book or any kind of writing edited by a professional editor?
Yeah. Oh, I could sing the praises of editors all day long. So I think that when people think of editing, like you said, they think of like fixing my typos, finding the missing commas, things like that. And they forget that editing comes on so many levels. So our books go through at least three rounds of editing. And the first round is simply, we call it substantive, but it's looking at the ideas and content level. So if your book has no typos at all, but there's a glaring hole in the logic, right? That's going to be a bigger problem than just having very clean writing. And so having another set of eyes, another perspective on whether it's a nonfiction, some kind of argument that you're making with research, or a fiction book, where are there plot holes? Are the characters compelling? And that's something that often as authors, I think it's a good thing that I also write books because I experience this where a line or something will make perfect sense to me. And I'll think it's absolutely perfect how it is. And then I share it with an editor and they say, I don't really get this, or I think something's missing here. And I never, ever would have noticed that if it were just my perspective on the book alone. Mm-hmm. So varying perspectives is a huge and valuable boon to any author. Your work can only be better with more feedback. So whether it's, I think, having someone look on that high level at the ideas, the organization, and then having someone look a little closer. How is the sentence style varied enough that the reader stays engaged? Is your tone consistent throughout? Mm-hmm. Sometimes we don't notice when we shift because we just write how we talk. So an editor can help us with that. And then, of course, we have our wonderful copy editors that get into the nitty-gritty of the punctuation and grammar. And each publishing house might have a certain style. Most use maybe the Chicago Manual of Style. And so having a professional who really understands that style dive in is just going to make your book feel so much more professional, so much more clean and polished. And I really don't think anyone would regret working with an editor.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Ann, before we ask Brooke to share that delicious recipe she talked about before we started recording, do you have any questions?
Yeah, I actually wrote a few down. So I wanted to know how, learning about where your food comes from is helpful when you're in the actual kitchen cooking with your kids, because I When I was writing one of my first articles, I found a study that, it was a study where they had like a group of kids in like a school, and they kind of taught them, where like the food comes from, and it seemed like they got a better understanding with cooking, that they got a better understanding of like food and like healthier food, just by cooking in the kitchen. Like just being able to be in the kitchen and cook, they found themselves more interested in eating healthier choices than non-healthier choices. So I wanted to know what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's kind of two levels there, right? So one, knowing where it comes from. I think part of that is just sort of an interest in the fact that food doesn't just appear. It doesn't just appear in the store. It doesn't just appear in our refrigerator. It has to be grown in the ground, building an appreciation for farmers, right? The farmers around the world. What a vital and important network. So I love talking to my kids about that. And then talking about, maybe where in the world does it grow? Like pineapples need this kind of climate. They need a tropical climate to survive and to grow. And aren't they so sweet and delicious? And when we think about just the varied climates of the world and how important it is to maintain those, so we have this variety of food, then that builds the conversation of what can we do to protect our earth. So that's, I think, part of that. And then it builds sort of an understanding of other people around the world. I look outside, and here in Utah, like peaches grow really, really well. Berries grow really well. But, pineapples or avocados don't really. But I love those. And so it's, I think, really fun to talk with my kids about what do we see that grows here. There are people all around the world that grow different kinds of foods, and that's what they are more likely to have in their breakfast because they can get it at their local market, right? And we're so lucky when we get those things shipped here, but it's a lot of work to get that from so far away. So I think there's that level that's super important for kids and interesting to them. It's a good conversation to have. And anytime you're able to just engage your kids in conversation, I think that's a moment of bonding. And that's a moment that builds that relationship that we're all looking for anyway.
Yeah.
And then on kind of the second part of your question, in how like talking together, learning about cooking together, then builds the foundation for healthy eating. I've seen so much research. I agree. And that's sort of what went into this book, looking into the research of how do we encourage kids to make healthy choices. And we see a lot in diet culture, this fixation on food that then will change your body in a certain way, especially like smaller is better. We get all of these toxic messages. And I really didn't want my kids, and I know most parents don't want their kids making food choices based on that, based on fear, based on fat phobia, based on not being happy with their body. But rather, I want them to make choices based on how they want their body to feel, as well as what foods bring them joy, and what tastes good. Like food should taste good. It should be a great experience when we eat. So when we cook together and when they're, cutting up something new, they're more likely to, maybe they'll lick their finger. If they're handling the food, touching it, even if they don't taste it, that is an exposure to that food that puts them one step closer to actually trying that food. And then the more diverse their palate, the more I know they're getting the essential vitamins and minerals that they need for their body to feel good. And they're broadening their taste palette, which allows them greater enjoyment in a wider variety of tastes and textures. And I think that ultimately is what I feel is like eating healthy, quote unquote. I don't think that anyone needs to be on a certain kind of diet unless they have a medical condition, right? Mm-hmm. Our diet should be foods that the earth produces mostly and foods that taste good to our body. And we're able to listen to it to say, I'm hungry right now, or I'm full, I'm satisfied. So to me, those are the benchmarks of eating healthy. And when a child is chopping up their own strawberries, they can get a sense of, oh, this is about how much I want. Or maybe they'll cut up way, way too many and say, oh, I don't think I need this many. And that's a great lesson for them to learn early on.
Yeah. So cool.
Yeah. Actually, so my uncle, he's a retired potato farmer, in Southern Oregon. So I always kind of grew up knowing farmers and like understanding that kind of, I guess, culture. But I really appreciated what you had to say about, like diet culture and, talking to your kids about, cause obviously there's so much media around that, is telling us to be a certain size or a certain weight. And I think just like being able to teach your kids, like, yes, it's harmful to overeat and to only eat processed food, but it's also harmful to undereat and not get your nutrition. I think that a lot of times that kind of gets swept under the rug and it's more seen about how you look rather than how you feel. So I really appreciate what you had to say about that. I think that's really great.
Yeah. So, I think it's key. Like in my house, we don't say that's a good food, that's a bad food, right? There's no morality. I don't want them to eat an Oreo and say, oh, I'm bad because that's bad, right? I think we remove any kind of that guilt and stigma. And again, we go back to those basics of this is what food does in our body. And, my kids I have 5-year-old twins and a 7-year-old. So they're young, but they're old enough to understand some basics of nutrition. So they know that there are proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. And we talk about that and we say we need all of these. And going back to like an Oreo, that does one thing in our body. That gives energy. Carbohydrates give energy. But an apple also has carbohydrates for energy, but it has fiber to help our tummy feel good. It has vitamins to keep us healthy and keep us from getting sick. So we can talk on that level. And so then that, I think, leaves them open to knowing they don't need to feel guilty for their choices, but they know what choices will make their body feel better.
Very cool. Very cool. Hey, where can, we have time before we end. Can you share that recipe with us and what we need and how we can put it together?
Absolutely. Okay, so in the book, there are 7 recipes included, and these actually come from the Cookbook in Support of the United Nations. So that's an incredible book with recipes from all around the world by local chefs. Some are professional chefs, some are farmers, some are indigenous chefs. It's just an incredible book. I really recommend it. So we've pulled from that 7 recipes that I think kids would like or at least be interested to try, that also align with some of the ingredients we teach about in the book. So this one specifically is about bananas. And this recipe comes from India. They're called Kerana cutlets. So they're actually little banana croquettes, or fritters is sometimes what they're called. So I'll be sure to share this so you can have the link or a PDF of this recipe as well, but just kind of an overview. So we take 4 bananas, and you want them to be unripe, still green. And then you'll use sesame oil, some finely chopped green chilies, ginger, some spices, cumin, coriander, turmeric, mint, cilantro. And then we have millet, which is sort of a grain. And you'll cook the millet. And so the first thing you'll do is boil a pot of water. and we add the green bananas still in their peel. So this is another way we're avoiding waste, right? We're using that peel as a container for boiling. Once the bananas are peeled, they turn kind of black and the peels start to split. The peels turn black. So after 45 minutes, they'll remove it from the boiling water and let them cool. Then we pull out the bananas and mash them. So then we set that to the side, and in a frying pan, you'll take some sesame oil, heat that up. We add the chilies and all of the different spices, cook that until the flavor's really released. Then we add the bananas into the oil, into the flavoring, and cook about 5 to 7 minutes just to really infuse the banana with the flavor. We add a little bit of lemon juice, some salt, and then remove them from the heat. Next, we're going to actually shape them into the little fritters. So we get our hands wet, and then we take the cooled banana mixture, and you can make this into about 25 little croquettes. And they can be sort of little balls or cylindrical, whatever shape the kids want to make. I think this is the fun part where they get their hands into it, right? Kind of a Play-Doh texture. So once you have the shapes about 2 inches long, then you'll put them on a pan in a single layer and into the oven. So those will bake, and then when they're hot, then you'll transfer them. Sorry, I'm reading this into the amaranth, the millet and amaranth mixture. So that grain that we talked about. And so this will kind of be a coating all around the fritter, all around that banana. You roll the little banana in the amaranth, goes all over, and then you put them back in the oven for another 30 minutes, 30 to 40. So then you pull that out. You can have kind of a chutney to serve it with or a jam. And they hold together their shape, really sweet because they're the banana inside. But that little pop of spice gives it that Indian flair. And that's it.
Cool.
So those are the Karanak cutlets.
They sound delicious, and we're going to make sure that we have that available in our Reading with Your Kids magazine, and I can't wait to share that with everybody. Hey, in the meantime, can you tell us where we can go to find out more about How Does Our Food Grow and find out more about you?
Absolutely. So How Does Our Food Grow is available at familias.com, as well as on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever books are sold. For now, that's a pre-order that will release in August 2023. So you can find that, again, that's familias.com and FAMILIUS.com.
Awesome. We've had a really great time speaking with the author of How Does Our Food Grow? Fantastic book from our friends at Familias, written by our friend Brooke Jorden. Hey, Brooke, on behalf of Ann O'Leary, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks so much. Really appreciate being here.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Emily Ettlinger. She'll be here to celebrate Skeletor, the Decomposer, a great new children's graphic novel. It's a fun conversation. You don't want to miss it. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, we want to start by thanking our guest, Brooke Jorden. Please be sure to check out How Does Our Food Grow? Also want to thank my amazing co-host, Ann O'Leary. I want to thank the rest of my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Madison Dieris, Monica Rivera-Sosa, Soji Franklin. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by Reading with Your Kids. I'll be looking through the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.